There's a knife on this table that, from 6 feet away, looks exactly like a 6-shooter. Same grip, same cylinder, same barrel. Pick it up and your hand instinctively wraps around it like you're about to thumb back the hammer. Then you press a release. The whole thing snaps open. And what was a revolver a half-second ago is now a folding blade in your hand. No powder, no primer, no chamber, just steel that was built to trick your eyes before it ever had to cut anything. The question I want answered today isn't whether this thing looks cool. It's whether underneath the costume there's an actual knife worth carrying. Or if the disguise is the only interesting part of it. I've got 3 of these on the bench, all built on the same basic idea, sold under different names, and I'm going to run them through exactly what I'd run any folder through: cutting, piercing, abuse, and then the one test that usually tells you everything. A spec sheet won't. Here's the part that made me want to do this video in the first place. These 3 knives, different branding, different price points, sold by 3 different companies, are built on the same core mold. Same silhouette, same general dimensions, same revolver folding knife pitch. One company slaps Wyatt Earp on the grip and sells it as an Old West collectible. Another calls theirs Billy the Kid. A third skips the outlaw branding entirely and just calls it the 44 Mag. Same idea, 3 costumes, 3 names pulled from gunfighter history that has nothing to do with what's actually inside the handle. That's worth remembering every time you see a knife or anything else, marketed with a legendary name attached. The name doesn't cut. The steel does. This idea is older than you'd think, and it didn't start as a gimmick. Long before anyone was stamping these out of budget steel for $20, gunsmiths were combining blades and firearms for real, because for most of history, a single shotgun was useless the moment you pulled the trigger. In the 1830s, a design called the Elgin Cutlass pistol paired a rifled percussion barrel with a 9-inch Bowie blade built right into the trigger guard, a genuine sidearm that happened to also be a knife, patented by a man capitalizing on the Bowie craze sweeping the country at the time. A century later, an Illinois manufacturer built folding pocket knives with a working .22 barrel hidden in the spine, and an Arizona company followed up with a similar folding utility knife chambered for .22 or .38. Those were real, functioning combination weapons built because the mission demanded it. 1 tool, 2 chances to survive an encounter. What I'm holding today is not that. It's the aesthetic without the mechanism. A knife that borrowed the shape of that old idea and kept none of what made it dangerous. That's worth knowing going in, because it changes what we're actually judging here. We're not testing a weapon system, and we're not testing a piece of history. We're testing whether 3 companies can build an honest folding knife inside a novelty shell without cutting corners to do it, or whether the shape is doing all the work the steel should be doing. First thing I noticed picking this up, the grip. It's the Wyatt Earp branded version, 440 stainless blade, 2 3/4 inches, 7.5 inches overall. Manual assist opening, a metal alloy and plastic frame shaped like a single-action revolver. The release sits where a cylinder latch would be. Push it, and a spring-loaded blade snaps forward out of what would be the barrel, locking into place with a solid click. That part actually impresses me a little. It's not a slow, stiff deployment. It's fast, and it locks up tight. No wobble side to side. First impression, this isn't just a keychain gag. Somebody put a real folding knife mechanism inside a costume, but a knife that opens fast isn't automatically a knife that cuts. So let's find out. I start with rope, 1/2-inch nylon, the kind you'd actually have wrapped around a pack or a tarp line. First pass, clean cut, no sawing required. Second test, cardboard, the unglamorous chore every EDC blade eventually gets stuck doing. It slices through corrugated board in long, controlled strokes without the edge folding over or skating offline. That tells me the factory edge, at least out of the box, was actually put there on purpose, and not just for show. Then I bring in the second knife, the Billy the Kid version. Same general shape, same 440 steel claim, but a lockback mechanism instead of the assisted opening liner lock on the Wyatt Earp. Same rope, same cardboard. Comparable results? Maybe a slightly cleaner bite on the cardboard, which makes sense. Lockbacks tend to sit a hair more rigid under lateral pressure than a thin, assisted liner lock. At this point, I'll admit something. I expected these to be junk. Painted pot metal with an edge that wouldn't survive a birthday cake. Instead, in the first two tests, I've got two blades that behave like actual pocket knives. That's the first real surprise of this video, and it's exactly the kind of surprise that makes me want to push harder, because a knife that survives cardboard hasn't proven much yet. Now bring in knife number 3, the 44 mag, an assisted opening version finished in gunmetal instead of the Wyatt Earp's two-tone alloy. Out of the box, the assist spring on this one is noticeably stiffer, snapping the blade open with a sharper, louder action than either of the other two. Same rope test, same result. Clean pass. But something interesting happens on the cardboard. The edge tracks slightly off-center about 2/3 of the way through each cut, pulling left instead of running straight. That's usually a sign the factory edge wasn't ground perfectly, even from one side of the blade to the other. Small thing, doesn't ruin the knife. But it's the first crack in the idea that all three of these are identical under their different paint jobs. So here's where the personality of this thing starts to take shape. It's not trying to be a tactical folder. It's not trying to be a bushcraft tool. What it actually is becomes clear the moment you set it down next to a normal $20 folder. This is a conversation piece that happens to also function. Pick it up at a campsite or a garage, and somebody's going to ask about it before they ask about anything else on the table. That's the product's real job. The question is whether it can do that job and still hold up when somebody decides to actually use it. Because eventually, somebody always does. That's the pivot I want to make right now, because is it a fun gimmick and is it a knife you can trust are two completely different questions. And so far, I've only answered the first one. Let's talk about how this thing actually lives in your hand and your pocket, because that's where a lot of novelty knives quietly fail, even when the steel is fine. The grip geometry is built to look like a revolver, not to be held like a knife. That means your index finger naturally wants to curl around what would be a trigger guard, which on this thing is just an empty loop of metal. It's not uncomfortable, but it's not optimized either. There's no real choke-up position for fine control, no forward finger groove, nothing shaped for precision cutting. For rope and cardboard, that doesn't matter much. For detail work, skinning out a small game animal, whittling a notch, anything that needs your hand close to the edge, this grip starts working against you. Pocket carry is the other trade-off. At 7.5 inches overall, with a boxy, irregular revolver profile, it doesn't sit flat or slim in a pocket the way a normal folder does. You feel it. You feel the hammer-shaped spine. You feel the cylinder bulge. This is not a knife that disappears into your gear. Maintenance is another place the shape works against the function. A normal folder has a flat spine and a straight edge, easy to run a stone or a pull-through sharpener along in one motion. These have a curved hammer and cylinder profile on the spine, which means you can't rest the blade flat against a bench stone without the grip lifting one end off the surface. You can still sharpen it. You just have to fight the shape to do it, and that's exactly the kind of small friction that makes people stop maintaining a knife altogether after the first few months. On value, at least, there's no real complaint. These typically run somewhere in the $15 to $30 range depending on the branding and the retailer, which puts them well below what you'd pay for a comparable steel and lock in a normal-shaped folder from a known knife company. You're not paying knife company prices. You're paying novelty prices for something that, so far, cuts like a real knife more often than it doesn't. And that brings me to the first real negative, the one that actually matters. I wanted to see what happens when you take this past pocket EDC and into field tool territory, so I ran a batoning test, using a piece of hardwood to drive the spine of the blade through a small length of kindling, the way you'd split fatwood for a fire. On the Wyatt Earp, the liner lock held for the first 2 strikes. On the third, harder strike, I felt play develop in the lockup, a small but real amount of blade wobble that wasn't there before. Nothing failed outright. But the tolerance loosened, and that's the kind of thing that gets worse with repetition, not better. The Billy the Kid, with its lockback, handled the same test with no detectable play afterward. Same steel claim, same rough category of knife, genuinely different result under stress. And that's the first serious flaw of this video. A liner lock built into a shell this thick and irregular doesn't have the same margin a purpose-built tactical folder does. Before writing that off as a design flaw, I wanted to know if it was fixable, because sometimes play in a liner lock is just a loose pivot screw, not a bad design. So I broke out a screwdriver, snugged down the pivot on the Wyatt Earp exactly a quarter turn, and ran the batoning test again on a fresh piece of the same kindling. The wobble was noticeably reduced, but not completely gone. That tells me part of the problem really was assembly tolerance. Something a 5-minute adjustment partially solves, but part of it is baked into the liner lock geometry itself, sitting inside a handle shaped like a revolver grip instead of a knife handle. A fix helped. It didn't cure it. Does that flaw actually matter? Depends entirely on who's buying it. If you're picking this up because you want a genuine bushcraft companion that batons kindling every weekend, the answer is simple. Skip it. There are $20 fixed blades that will outlast this by years. But that's not really who this product is built for. It's built for somebody who wants a striking piece of EDC, a gift, a display item that also happens to open a package or cut a strap in an emergency. For that mission, occasional light use, the lock loosening under a batoning test most owners will never attempt, is close to irrelevant. That's the thing about compromises. A flaw that disqualifies a tool for one job can be a complete non-issue for the job it was actually designed around. Now, here's something the original marketing angle never mentions, and it's the part I actually care about most as somebody who thinks about field practicality for a living. Carrying something shaped exactly like a revolver is not a neutral decision. In several states and countries, novelty items that closely resemble firearms fall under imitation firearm statutes, and pulling one out in public, even to open a box, can trigger a response you did not sign up for. It will not pass airport security in carry-on or checked luggage without questions, and it will absolutely draw the wrong kind of attention from law enforcement if it's visible during a traffic stop or a public disagreement. None of that is a knock on the steel. It's a real-world limitation that has nothing to do with edge retention and everything to do with the shape somebody chose to sell it in. A tool's usefulness isn't just about what it can cut. It's about what happens the moment someone else sees it in your hand. So we've got a real edge, a lock that's good enough for light use but not abuse, a grip built for looks over control, and a shape that creates problems the second it leaves your pocket. That's a lot of trade-offs for one small folding knife. But I'm not done yet, because I still haven't answered the question that actually opened this video. Is the legend, the revolver in disguise reputation these things have built up online, actually earned? Or is it just a good-looking photo on a listing page? For the final test, I wanted to see what these knives do at their absolute limit. Not rope, not cardboard, the hardest material I had on hand. A frozen half-inch length of oak straight out of a cooler of ice. Cold wood is brittle and unforgiving on an edge. It's one of the harder honest tests you can run on a folder without breaking something on purpose. The Wyatt Earp got through it, but the edge came out with 2 visible microchips along the first inch of the blade, the kind of damage that tells you the heat treatment on this steel is serviceable, not exceptional. The Billy the Kid, same frozen oak, came away with a slightly rolled edge instead of chipping. Different failure mode, arguably the less severe of the two, since a rolled edge can be stropped back into service in the field, and a chip usually can't. The 44 mag, the one with the off-center grind from earlier, got through about half the log before the assisted spring lost enough tension to stop snapping the blade fully open on the return stroke. Not a break, just a mechanism that had clearly taken more cycles than it was built for in one sitting. I set all 3 down afterward and actually looked at them under a light before saying anything. That pause matters because the differences here aren't dramatic on camera. They're the kind of thing you only catch by running a thumbnail down the edge and checking for a catch where there shouldn't be one. The Wyatt Earp, 2 visible microchips you can feel with a fingernail. The Billy the Kid, a rolled edge, smooth to the touch, but clearly not sharp anymore. The 44 mag, edge intact, mechanism tired. 3 knives, 3 different ways of showing you exactly where the corner was cut. And that's the real story these 3 knives tell you when you put them side by side. Same silhouette, same marketing pitch, same novelty gun knife category. But 3 different manufacturing decisions produced 3 different outcomes under the exact same stress. The shape sells the knife. The lock and the heat treatment decide whether it's actually good. So, is the reputation deserved? Partially, and that's the honest answer. As a piece of everyday carry with real cutting performance for the tasks most owners will actually put it through, opening mail, cutting cord, slicing tape, being the thing you show people at the campsite, these knives do more than they have any right to for the price. The blade steel isn't premium, but it's genuine, sharpened on purpose, and capable of clean, repeatable cuts. As a field tool meant to take abuse, baton wood, or survive a genuinely hard-to-use cycle, the lock geometry built into that revolver shell is the weak point, and the Billy the Kid's lock-back construction earns real credit over the assisted liner lock for anyone who plans to push these past light duty. And as a piece of gear you actually carry in public, the shape itself is the biggest liability of all. Not because of what it is, but because of what it looks like to everyone around you before they know what it is. Who should actually buy one of these? Collectors? Gift buyers? Anybody who wants a genuinely well-made conversation piece that happens to cut better than it has any obligation to. Who should skip it? Anybody looking for a serious daily carry blade or a field tool that needs to survive real abuse. There are better knives in better shapes for less money if that's the mission. And that's the Ranger rule for today. Don't judge what a tool can do by the costume it's wearing. A knife's worth was decided at the factory, in the steel and the lock, long before anybody shaped the handle into something that would turn heads. Look past the silhouette. Test the thing itself. Then decide if it earns a place in your pocket. That's it for this one. Sharpen something today.